There we go, we're on. Joshua chapter 6. Now the gates of Jericho were securely barred because of the Israelites. No one went out and no one came in. Then the Lord said to Joshua, "See, I have delivered Jericho into your hands, along with its king and its fighting men. March around the city once with all the armed men. Do this for 6 days. Have 7 priests carry trumpets of ram's horns in front of the park. On the 7th day, march around the city 7 times with the priests blowing the trumpets. When you hear them sound a long blast on the trumpets, have the whole army give a loud shout. Then the wall of the city will collapse, and the army will go up. Everyone straight in." So Joshua, son of Nun, called the priests and said to them, "Take up the ark of the covenant of the Lord, and have 7 priests carry trumpets in front of it." And he ordered the army, "Advance, march around the city with an armed guard going ahead of the ark of the Lord." When Joshua had spoken to the people, the 7 priests carrying the 7 trumpets before the Lord went forward, blowing their trumpets, and the ark of the Lord's covenant followed them. The armed guard marched ahead of the priests who blew the trumpets, and the rear guard followed the ark. All this time the trumpets were sounding. But Joshua had commanded the army, "Do not give a war cry, do not raise your voices, do not say a word until the day I tell you to shout, then shout." So he had the ark of the Lord carried around the city, circling it once. Then the army returned to the camp and spent the night there. Joshua got up early the next morning, and the priests took up the ark of the Lord. The 7 priests carrying the 7 trumpets went forward, marching before the ark of the Lord and blowing the trumpets. The armed men went ahead of them, and the rear guard followed the ark of the Lord while the trumpets kept sounding. So on the 2nd day, they marched around the city once and returned to the camp. They did this for 6 days. On the 7th day, they got up at daybreak and marched around the city 7 times in the same manner, except that on that day they circled the city 7 times. The 7th time around, when the priest sounded the trumpet blast, Joshua commanded the army, "Shout, for the Lord has given you the city. The city and all that is in it are to be devoted to the Lord. Only Rahab the prostitute and all who are with her in her house shall be spared, because she hid the spies we sent. But keep away from the devoted things, so that you will not bring about your own destruction by taking any of them. Otherwise you will make the camp of Israel liable to destruction and bring trouble on it. All the silver and gold and the articles of bronze and iron are sacred to the Lord and must go into his treasury." When the trumpet sounded, the army shouted, and at the sound of the trumpet, when the men gave a loud shout, the wall collapsed. So everyone charged straight in, and they took the city. They devoted the city to the Lord and destroyed with the sword every living thing in it, men and women, young and old, cattle, sheep, and donkeys. Joshua said to the 2 men who had spied out the land, "Go into the prostitute's house and bring her out, and all who belong to her, in accordance with your oath to her." So the young man who had done the spying went in and brought out Rahab, her father, her mother, her brothers and sisters, and all who belonged to her. They brought out her entire family and put them in a place outside the camp of Israel. Then they burned the whole city and everything in it, but put the silver and gold and articles of bronze and iron into the treasury of the Lord's house. But Joshua spared Rahab the prostitute with her family and all who belonged to her, because she hid the men of Joshua and had sent as spies to Jericho, because she had hid the men Joshua had sent as spies to Jericho, and she lives among the Israelites to this day. At the time Joshua pronounced this solemn oath, "Cursed before the Lord is the one who undertakes to rebuild this city Jericho. At the cost of his firstborn son, he will lay its foundations. At the cost of its youngest, he will set up its gates." So the Lord was with Joshua, and his fame spread throughout the land.
But the Israelites were unfaithful in regard to the devoted things. Achan, son of Carmi, the son of Zimri, the son of Zerah, the son of the tribe of Judah, took some of them. So the Lord's anger burned against Israel. Now Joshua sent men from Jericho to Ai, which is near Beth Aven, to the east of Bethel, and told them, "Go up and spy out the region." So the men went up and spied out Ai. When they returned to Joshua, they said, "Not all the army will have to go up against Ai. Send 2,000 or 3,000 men to take it, and do not weary the whole army, for only a few people live there." So about 3,000 went up, but they were routed by the men of Ai, who killed about 36 of them. They chased the Israelites from the city gate as far as the stone quarries and struck them down on the slopes. At this, the hearts of the people melted in fear and became like water. Then Joshua tore his clothes and fell face down to the ground before the ark of the Lord, remaining there till evening. The elders of Israel did the same and sprinkled dust on their heads. And Joshua said, "Alas, sovereign Lord, why did you ever bring this people across the Jordan to deliver us into the hands of the Amorites to destroy us? If only we had been content to stay on the other side of the Jordan. Pardon your servant, Lord. What can I say now that Israel has been routed by its enemies? The Canaanites and the other people of the country will hear about this, and they will surround us and wipe out our name from the earth. What then will you do for your own great name?" The Lord said to Joshua, "Stand up. What are you doing down on your face? Israel has sinned. They have violated my covenant, which I commanded them to keep. They have taken some of the devoted things. They have stolen, they have lied, they have put them with their own possessions. That is why the Israelites cannot stand against their enemies. They turn their backs and run because they have been made liable to destruction. I will not be with you any more unless you destroy whatever among you is devoted to destruction. Go, consecrate the people, tell them, consecrate yourselves in preparation for tomorrow, for this is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says. There are devoted things among you, Israel. You cannot stand against your enemies until you remove them. In the morning, present yourself tribe by tribe. The tribe the Lord chooses shall come forward, clan by clan. The clan the Lord chooses shall come forward, family by family, and the family The family the Lord chooses shall come forward man by man. Whoever is caught with the devoted thing shall be destroyed by fire, along with all that belongs to him. He has violated the covenant of the Lord and has done an outrageous thing. In Israel. Early the next morning, Joshua made Israel come forward by tribes, and Judah was chosen. The clans of Judah came forward, and the Zerathites were chosen. He made the clan of the Zerites come forward by families, and Zimri was chosen. Joshua made his family come forward man by man, and Achan, son of Carmi, the son of Zimri, the son of Zerah, of the tribe of Judah, was chosen. Then Joshua said to Achan, "My son, give glory to the Lord, the God of Israel, and honor him. Tell me what you have done. Do not hide it from me." Achan replied, "It is true, I have sinned against the Lord, the God of Israel. This is what I have done. When I saw in the plunder a beautiful robe from Babylonia, 200 shekels of silver, and a bar of gold weighing 50 shekels, I coveted them and took them. They are hidden in the ground inside my tent, with the silver underneath." So Joshua sent messengers, and they ran to the tent, and there it was, hidden in his tent, with the silver underneath. They took the things from the tent, brought them to Joshua and all the Israelites, and spread them out before the Lord. Then Joshua, together with all the Israelites, took Achan, son of Zerah, the silver, the robe, the gold bar, his sons and daughters, his cattle, donkeys, and sheep, his tent, and all that he had, to the valley of Achor. Joshua said, "Why have you brought this trouble on us? The Lord will bring trouble on you today." Then all Israel stoned him And after that, they stoned the rest. They burned them. The sheep, his tent, and all that he had. To the valley of Achor. Joshua said, "Why have you brought this?" Over Achan. They heaped up a large pile of rocks, which remains to this day. Then the Lord turned from his fierce anger. Therefore, that place has been called the Valley of Achor ever since.
Good morning, everyone. Let me just move this. So thank you to John and for Anne for that very long reading. So thank you for listening to it. As you might have noticed, Joshua is a very long book of the Bible, and we got quite a short time to get through it, so we're taking quite big chunks each week. So I thought it would be good to see the whole of the reading. I think it might be one of those days where the Bible reading might be longer than the actual sermon, but we will see. Maybe these stories are quite familiar to us, and I have quite clear childhood memories of learning these stories that we've just read, particularly the bit about the Israelites marching around the city until the walls fell down without anyone lifting a finger. And then the story of Achan hiding his loot in the ground and then getting found out. And I recall the moral of these stories being about trusting in God and obeying him even when he asks you to do something silly, or how we shouldn't be greedy and how we shouldn't lie or steal. There's nothing wrong with taking these lessons away from the passage, but that's not where I'm going with this today. Firstly, that would be far too easy. And secondly, I think there are deeper things going on here which need unpacking. And some of that was raised a little bit in the video that we've just seen. So there's no doubt that Joshua chapter 6 and 7 raises very difficult questions for us. Questions so difficult that some Christians prefer to avoid the Old Testament altogether. But let's not avoid the difficult questions and the awkward truths. I certainly can't promise you that by the end of this morning all questions will be answered and all challenges will be resolved. But by grappling with this stuff, I believe there is much for us to learn about the God that we worship and his relationship to us, and it ultimately points us to Jesus. And I want to start by extracting ourselves from the viewpoint of the writer of Joshua, and instead put ourselves in the shoes and in the eyes of those people on the other side of the wall. Those people were inside the city of Jericho during the siege. So we can imagine the growing fear as this huge foreign army flowed into their country and surrounded the city. With no way in and no way out, it would only be a matter of time until their food ran out and they would have to resort to desperate means for survival. The only thing separating them from this army was this huge solid wall around their city. And for a while it seemed that the wall was doing its job and was providing a strong defense as a standoff seemed to be occurring as the army just marched around silently outside for 6 days. But then, following more marching on the 7th day, suddenly there's a cacophony of noise, the blast of trumpets, the shouts of men, and then the most terrifying noise of all, the rumbling of the earth as the foundations gave way and the once impenetrable city walls collapsed into rubble and dust. And we know from the story of Rahab that many people had their homes in the wall, and so the collapse of the wall itself would no doubt have cost countless lives. But then the real terror begins. Men, women, and children defenseless against the marauding invaders with makeshift weapons, determined to slaughter anyone in their path, taking no prisoners. Nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. Scenes too unimaginable for us to behold. The sound of screams, the stench of blood and death. We have to be honest here. If such an event happened today, it could not be classed as anything other than genocide. Of course, we have to consider the context. Some scholars suggest that the text we read uses hyperbole, and that in reality it wasn't such a complete massacre as we're led to believe. Others point to the detestable practices of the Canaanites, the people who were living in the city of Jericho, and that this was a just punishment for their sin. We should also note that the invasion of Canaan was a bit of a one-off for the Israelites. While they did engage in many other bloody battles, they were more than often defending themselves from foreign aggressors bent on conquest and empire. And yet, even in the light of these caveats, we cannot help but be disturbed and horrified by what we read. And I believe this is the right response. There is no beauty in bloodshed. Whatever the context, bloodshed and violence is ugly, horrible, traumatic, and evil. And fundamentally, that is because bloodshed is a symptom of sin. The world that God brought into existence contained no death or suffering or violence, and yet the moment sin entered the world, that all changed. While eating fruit from a forbidden tree might not seem all that bad in the grand scheme of things, it didn't take long for these sins of disobedience and pride and selfish ambition to escalate. Just one generation later, Cain's murder of his brother Abel set the standard for the history of mankind. And today we don't have to try very hard to see the hate and suffering that sin has wreaked havoc on our world. Sin is a disease, and bloodshed is the ultimate symptom. And yet, paradoxically, bloodshed is also God's way of dealing with sin. You might remember last week I was talking about the Passover, and maybe because it was a harvest festival and I was talking to the children, you might have noticed that I skipped over the most important part of the Passover story. God didn't just rescue the Israelites by coming down in a puff of smoke and teleporting them peacefully over to the promised land. No, it was far more complicated than that. On the night of their exodus from Egypt, every Israelite family was instructed to slaughter a lamb and paint its blood on the door frames of their house. Now, I enjoy a dinner of roast lamb as much as the next man, but if you ask me to butcher the lamb myself and start playing around with its blood, that would be a much less pleasant dining experience. Worse still, any households that didn't have the blood on the door, that night would wake up to find the firstborn son dead. For the Israelites and for their enemies, salvation was costly. Yet we still ask the question, could there have been another way? And we ask the same question when we read about the conquest of Jericho. Yes, many of the Canaanites were living lives saturated by sin and abuse. Yes, the Israelites needed a place to live, and the Canaanite people happened to be occupying the land they were promised. But could there have been another way? Following the capture of Jericho, the story continues. The Israelites next set about attacking Ai, which is a word that has a very different meaning today. But this time, their mission was not successful. In fact, it was an abject failure, resulting in the deaths of 36 men. And once again, it is sin that underpins this narrative. God reveals to Joshua that the failure to capture Ai was due to the violation of the covenant, and that Achan, son of Carmi, son of Zimri, son of Zerah of the tribe of Judah, was the man responsible. And the solution was to purge sin from the camp by stoning to death Achan and his children. And again we ask, could there have been another way? Could the lives of this family have been spared while still enabling the Israelites to move forward with their campaign? And when we read the story of Achan, the parallels with the story of Jesus are very clear. Achan was a thief and a liar, and perhaps he deserved what was coming to him. But there's no doubt that he was also singled out as a scapegoat, willingly sacrificed so that the covenant could be restored and everyone else could then move forward with their story and then contemplate victory once again. In contrast to Achan, Jesus was a man without sin. And yet similarly, he also willingly took on the role of scapegoat. submitting himself to everything that an evil, violent, malicious world could throw at him. There was nothing beautiful about his crucifixion. Excruciating suffering, overwhelming humiliation, unbearable trauma for those who had to witness it. The painful cost of our salvation. And so we ask the question, could there have been another way? And why shouldn't we ask this question, as Jesus himself asked the very same question as he wrestled with his looming destiny just hours before in the Garden of Gethsemane? If it be your will, take this cup from me. We can speculate about what that other way might have looked like. In Matthew chapter 4, we read of Jesus' meeting with the devil in the desert. And it was here that this other way was mapped out before him. If only he would do a deal with the devil and bow down and worship him, then Jesus would be granted all the kingdoms of the world. Nobody has to die. And maybe some good would have come from this alternative option, allowing Jesus to have some positive influence in the world. But it would have been a fudge, a compromise, a temporary solution, an unholy alliance with evil. Only through the way of the cross could Jesus defeat evil and triumph over sin and death once and for all. So where does that leave us today? Unlike the Israelites, of course, we are not a nomadic people faced with displacing an incumbent population in order to inherit the land promised to us. But we are heirs to a promise. Last week, remember, we looked at Revelation chapter 21 and 22, which paints a picture of a future with no more death or mourning or crying or pain, where the trees bear fruit every month. This is poetic literature, so we have to be careful not to take things too literally, but it's very clear that, just like the Israelites, we as God's chosen people have a promised land ahead of us. But also, just like the Israelites, stepping into that promise comes at a very heavy cost. For them, as we have seen today and we will continue seeing in future weeks, every inch of ground taken involved the shedding of blood on all sides. For us, the blood shed by Jesus on the cross paid the full cost of our salvation, freedom, and inheritance. If we fast forward from the days of Joshua to the year 1099 AD, we see that once again blood flowed to the city streets in this region of the world, this time in Jerusalem, as the Crusaders besieged the city and then overwhelmed it, and another terrible massacre ensued. But in my view, this was different. This could not have been the will of God. When Jesus took his last breath on the cross, he cried out, "It is finished." It was a moment in history when all sin was purged, when the price of our salvation was paid in full, when no more blood needed to be spilled. Any attempts to take up the sword in God's name after this date is to deny the sufficiency, the completeness, and the universal power of Christ's sacrifice. Trying to add our own political or military power to the Christian gospel is essentially to cheapen and belittle the blood of Jesus and what it means for us. But before we go pointing the finger, there are many other ways in which we can be guilty of cheapening and downplaying the death of Jesus. Complacency, or the naive belief that we get God's blessings for free, or even that we deserve him. The failure to allow the love of God to transform us. The reluctance to take seriously Jesus' charge to take up our cross, or Paul's instruction to offer our bodies as a living sacrifice. These attitudes that are all so common in the church simply serve to diminish the power of the gospel and to cheapen the blood of Jesus. Now, next weekend promises to be a very special time in the fellowship of our church as we meet together at the Hayes. And this time next week, the culmination of our time together will involve celebrating Holy Communion. And so as we approach that time, let us remember that this is not just a memorial of an historic event, but it's about us entering into and participating in Christ's suffering, doing so in gratitude, unity, and recommitment. As Paul says in Philippians, this is about becoming like him in his death, and so attaining to the resurrection from the dead. So when we read these stories from Joshua, it's very easy to be dismissive and try to distance ourselves from these events, and even try to redesign God in our own image. Yet we need to be reminded that this is our God and this is our story. The covenant that existed between God and his people back then is the same covenant that we take part in now, brought to its fulfillment through the death and resurrection of Jesus. So let us not be people who take hold of the promises and blessings of the Christian life without counting the cost.